Welcome back to another episode of the Nuances podcast, where we talk about our Asian stories and how our cultures affect everything from our career choices to our views on anti-racism, disability justice, queer rights, and so many more. I'm your host Azu, a new American who grew up in the only place a dodo bird ever lived, Mauritius. Happy Asian American, Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander AANHPI Heritage Month. Wow, that was a mouthful. Whose idea was it to group us all together in such a long acronym? It's a long story, but if you want, I'll do another episode on that next time. If you're in Canada, happy Asian Heritage Month. At least Canadians figured out that scope creep is not a great idea. First, I want to acknowledge that most people associate this month with people who look like me, East Asians. But don't forget, South Asians, Southeast Asians, West Asians, Central Asians are also Asians. If you look at most AANHPI celebrations, you'll notice that Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders often seem like an afterthought. Same for Southeast Asians, South Asians. Central Asians and West Asians are rarely ever included at all. By the way, nothing demonstrates this more than the reason why it's in May in the first place. Two reasons. The first Japanese immigrants to the US arrived on May 7th, 1843. And on May 10th, 1869, the final spike for the transcontinental railroad track was embedded, and Chinese laborers played a crucial role in building the railroad. It is worth noting, though, that the Chinese railroad workers were not included in the official photographs commemorating that moment. Because, racism. Both of those dates are only significant to these two East Asian groups as far as is officially recognized. Now, this podcast is specifically focused on the first letter of that acronym, Asian. There are reasons for that. The main one is that I'm not the right person to talk about Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander experiences because those are very different from the Asian American experience. The other is that Asian is already super broad, and I already struggle to do all the groups justice. Again, scope creep is a terrible thing. If you've been listening to this podcast, you know we're big fans of intersectionality and calling our own people in. So I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the fact that Asian Americans have sometimes benefited from or contributed to harm to Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders. I'm not an expert on the subject, but I will link to a few resources in the show notes if you want to learn more about the history. I think as we celebrate our heritage this month and honor our ancestors' struggles, we also have to be honest about when and how our community has caused harm, and we must commit to do better. So this AANHPI Heritage Month or Asian Heritage Month, my challenge to you is to seek out those less represented voices under this giant umbrella, or seek out stories that are from a different Asian ethnic group than your own. If you go on our website, nuancespod.com, you'll see a drop-down menu to browse by category. You can scroll down to find the diaspora you know very little about. Let's say, for example, the Lao diaspora, or even religions. Maybe Sikhism is something you've never really looked into. Of course, there's all the issues that we talk about as well that you can choose. Anything that you're interested in, whether it's food, wine, music, writing, journalism, medicine. We've covered a lot of topics. We also have 14 guests from the queer Asian community. Speaking of which, I will soon be launching a limited series exploring the quote-unquote queer history of premodern Asia, where sexual diversity was much more prevalent than is commonly known today. You will hear from familiar voices and some new ones, as I'll be featuring queer Asian co-hosts and scholars. I'm so excited for this, and I think you will be too, because these are the titles of the episodes. Episode 1, Prince Charming and His King. Episode 2, But Where Are the Lesbians? Episode 3, 50 Shades of Gender. Episode 4, The West, Savior or Demonizer? Episode 5, Gods, Sex, and the Patriarchy. Episode 6, Love, Marriage, and Their Casual Relationship. Don't you want to know what's in them? If you do, please, please, please make sure to follow the podcast wherever you're listening to right now. Go ahead. Go find that plus button or that add button, whatever the button says, click it. If you're excited about this, do let me know. Send me a DM. I love hearing from you. I've gotten some really lovely messages from some of you recently, and it really fills my heart. Now back to our regularly scheduled program. I do my best to curate seasons that showcase diverse interests and perspectives on the show. And after 52 episodes, I hope there is something for everyone to enjoy this month. It's so hard to pick, but I'm going to highlight 12 episodes that each bring a perspective you might not have heard elsewhere that I think is important to listen to this month. Season 3, Episode 8 with Kiran, Kaur, Gill. She talked about Sikhism, turban myths that erupted after 9/11, and how she has been working diligently to create programs that educate law enforcement officers, TSA officers, FBI. They've done training all over the country, and this episode is such a great example of how to build trust and how to really break down those barriers. Season 3, Episode 5 with Dani Saldo taught me so much about disability. Dani is a hot, talented, disabled, bisexual pop star on the rise from Toronto. We talked about mental health, about becoming disabled at a very young age. She's only in her 20s. About how it affected her friendships, her relationship with work. And also we talked about being bisexual and having a difficult time explaining that to her family, navigating queerness in Filipino culture. There's a lot of great stuff, and there is music from Dani, so be sure to tune in for that. Season 3, Episode 9, Rita Phetmixay taught us a little history lesson about Laos and the secret war in Laos that was happening around the same time as the Vietnam War, and how her family became refugees. They settled in the US. She grew up in the South and then moved to LA, and there's a contrast there. She is now a licensed therapist, and we talked about healing intergenerational trauma, how storytelling can be a powerful tool, and also how to set healthy boundaries in Asian culture. Soo Jin Lee, Season 4, Episode 1, grew up undocumented in LA. She's a Korean American. She is now a licensed therapist. And one of the really interesting points in that conversation for me was I asked her, what do you say to people who know that our parents have intergenerational trauma, but they refuse to go to therapy? And her answer really surprised me. She said, maybe therapy isn't the right thing for them. We talked about alternative ways of healing. And I think that is something that is so helpful that many of us could really use more of in our life. So definitely go check that out. Season 3, Episode 3 with Dr. Manoj Maradian was really helpful for me to understand more the nuances of the woman life freedom revolution in Iran. Specifically, she went over the history of US-Iran relations, how there was a CIA-backed coup in 1953, which eventually led to the revolution in 79, how that brings us to here, and then how the Western media may be misinterpreting what Iranians truly want out of this current feminist revolution. Season 3, Episode 6 with Travis Nguyen. I learned so much from that episode. Travis is an interpreter and translator. He speaks, I believe, 6 languages. And one of those languages is ASL. So we talked about working with deaf and deafblind communities and how much we take for granted as people who can see. And he also talked about intergenerational trauma and how it manifests in day-to-day life. We also talked about him being gay and how his family struggled with that. Season 2, Episode 4 with Qasim Rashid was a super uplifting episode. For Season 1 and Season 2, I was joined by co-host Ariadne Milla, who's my bestie. She's not on the show anymore, but fond memories. So the episode with Qasim, we talked about Islam and how Islam inspires him to advocate for women, for the poor, even for his haters. We talk about how he changed people's minds just through kindness and compassion. He talked about how he remains focused on his activism as a civil rights lawyer, an organizer, how he remains focused in a world full of injustice. Especially right now, if you're feeling defeated, this is a very inspiring episode. I highly recommend you check that out. Season 1, Episode 5 with Oslin, a songwriter, artist, and single mom who's got the most adorable boys. That's an episode that'll make you cry, it'll make you laugh, and it'll make you feel whole. She's from the Hmong American diaspora. We talk about being a single mom, how she finds time to pursue her passions while also being a great mom, and how her kids are just the most adorable. Season 2, Episode 9, we had Offering Rain, who has Ecuadorian and Indian roots and is a multimedia artist. We talked about growing up in New York with their dad, living in an artist commune, and the importance of early access to the arts in order to create diversity in creative fields. We also talk about how, as somebody with Ecuadorian and Indian roots, it was really hard to feel seen, and the moments that they finally felt that with mainstream media. Our very first guest on this show was Rahul Borkar, a music artist and producer from Louisville, Kentucky. And I have to say, that episode really challenged my stereotypes of what it must be like living in Louisville, Kentucky. Rahul's story is also very inspiring. He was in the first indie band that was on iTunes back in the day when not anybody could get their songs on iTunes. And he's one of the nicest humans on earth, so check out that episode. Season 3, Episode 7 with Scott Okamoto was really funny, first of all, but it also included important commentary from Scott about the Oppenheimer movie and why that did not sit well with many in the Japanese diaspora. We also talked about him being an English professor at an evangelical school, the terrifyingly racist conversations he had with his students, but also how some of them eventually did come around, and how you build relationships with people who have very, very different views than you. And especially right now, I think this is a skill that we could all use more of. So go check that out. And finally, I would be remiss if I do not mention the latest episode with Cece, Season 4, Episode 7, the Trans Day of Visibility special we did with her and her son, which is the wholesome Asian trans representation you didn't know you needed. All right, this is a really short episode. Life has been a little crazy on my end. But I'll be back next week with episode recommendations for Mother's Day, but also a new guest interview with Dr. Sophia Yen. I know I said it was going to be out today, but again, life has been crazy. Please take care of yourself. Next week, we'll be talking about women's health, making periods optional, best to worst methods of contraception, and what is missing from sex education. Hint, it's the fun part. All right, that's it for today. Once again, my name is Lazu, and I'll see you next week for another nuanced conversation. Here's my latest single. It's called Bloom Without Me. You can find it on all the stores and streaming platforms. Look for Lazu, Bloom Without Me.
Like summer flowers wither in the fall, shedding seeds for another season. I know this is where we have to fall apart, so we can be whole again. Turns out when we grow into ourselves, sometimes we grow apart. Wish I knew how to fix it, how to tell. It's a little late for that now. Don't know how to be without you. We'll bloom again someday, someplace where all our mistakes have made us wiser. We'll bloom, so bloom without me. I never thought I'd be the one causing you pain. Loved you more than I knew I could. You know, it kills me to let you go, but it'd kill me more to hold you back. I'll never be the same without you, but we'll bloom again someday, someplace where all our mistakes have made